Hello there, and welcome back. I will refrain from putting forth a full recap of everything that I've done in this argument. If you'd like to see all the definitions, assumptions, and claims that I've put forth, you can go back and watch the videos preceding this one in this playlist where I put forth all the claims and their justifications. And you could also look in the description of this video where I will put a link to a PDF that contains all of the relevant information, all of the definitions, claims, and assumptions, if you'd like to look at those. So, in this video, I will be putting forth the notion of a lock point. But before I do that, let me just recap what happened in the last video. In the last video, I claimed that there is a minimum that you need to do in order for it to even be possible that you attain the infinite reward, that infinite accumulation of the good state, that which results from a good free will event. Right? There is a minimum that you need to do. The minimum is not necessarily sufficient, but there is that minimum. You need to at least believe that the infinite reward exists, or else it's not possible to attain the infinite reward. From there, I argue that, well, that implies that there is a state of exclusion from the infinite reward. Okay, and both of those are logical possibilities. So, either an infinite reward or not infinite reward. But what I did not put forth was that eventually you get locked into one or the other. I did not put forth that notion yet. So far, the infinite reward is a pretty general notion where it could, at least it's a consistent idea with the infinite reward that you have the ability to make free will choices throughout eternity. And in that way, you can accumulate an infinite sum of good state. In this video, I will be putting forth the definition first, which is that of a lock point. I'm going to define the lock point to be the moment at which one enters a permanent state of either infinite reward or not infinite reward. So that means that it's the moment at which your will is locked into either the infinite reward or the not infinite reward, and it's based on the finite set of things that occurred leading up to that lock point. So, now, the claim, of course, that I'm going to put forth in this video, claim number 11, the lock point exists. So I'd be willing to bet that a lot of people watching this already have an intuition for this lock point, and the intuition would be something like, okay, well, if my mind is preserved after I die, then that means that I'm either going to go to a heaven or a hell, a place of eternal bliss or a place of eternal damnation, and that you're just locked in. You're just locked into one state or the other. I think a lot of people have that intuition, but certainly not everyone. It certainly is the case that some of these New Age and Eastern philosophies like to play around with the idea of something more like a reincarnation or an eternal regeneration, where after your body dies, your mind, your soul, whatever, will migrate to another body, and that this could, in principle, occur an infinite number of times, or at least I don't know these philosophies very well, but it seems like in principle, this allows for a sort of eternal migration of the soul, rather than there being necessarily a lock point, a point where you are just simply locked in to some state, and then there's nothing you can do about it thereafter. So, what I'm going to be doing here is, of course, arguing that there is that lock point. I am going to be arguing that there is a lock point. And specifically what I'm going to do is I'm going to suppose to the contrary that there is no lock point. And then I'm going to try and show that if you suppose that there is no lock point, then this leads to a paradox, and that the resolution is to bring in the existence of the lock point. Let's suppose that there is no lock point. There's no lock point, and therefore there's no point where your will is locked into whatever state is determined by the preceding free will events that you performed. Okay, so that means that necessarily you are going to have those free will events throughout the entirety of your existence. The entirety of your existence, you are going to have the ability to choose to do what is either good or not good. Okay, so that's our supposition here. Now, consider a person who does not believe in the existence of an infinite reward. He does not believe that the infinite reward exists. And that's the case throughout the entirety of his existence. He just does not believe that there is an infinite reward that he can attain. Okay. That necessarily means that the amount of good that he can accumulate, the amount of good state that he can accumulate across the entirety of his existence must be finite. That just follows from claim number 9. If you don't believe in the infinite reward, you cannot achieve the infinite reward. That means that the amount of reward that you can attain is finite, fixed. Okay. But we are saying that this hypothetical man believes that he has free will, and he believes that he can choose to do what is good in each free will event that he's presented with. Okay, so he can choose to do that finite good. Okay, so that means that without a lock point, though, there's going to be an infinite amount of free will choices that he can make. It's never going to end. There's never going to be an end point or a lock point where he can no longer choose to do what is good or not good. He will always have more free will events available to him. There will always be more. So, then we suppose, okay, well, if this man keeps up with doing what is good even some small fraction of the time throughout the entirety of his existence, he is necessarily going to have the chance to exceed that finite amount of good that he's allowed to attain by claim number 9. Okay, so just to recap that, claim number 9 says that there's only a finite amount of good that this man can achieve because he does not believe in the infinite reward. It's only finite. But because we have no lock point, that means that in each individual free will event, he can choose to do what's good. And then he can do it again, and again, and again, and again, and again, for all eternity. That means that necessarily he's eventually going to exceed that finite amount of reward accumulated that he's allowed to. And he can, furthermore, approach the infinite amount of reward and infinite accumulation. That is a paradox. That is a paradox. Those two things are not compatible. It is not possible that he's only constrained to achieve the finite accumulation of good, and yet he is able to achieve exceed that finite amount and eventually approach the infinite accumulation as time goes to infinity, right? So that is a paradox. So how do we address this paradox? All we do is suppose that we had the wrong supposition. Moreover, we need a lock point, right? That paradox is a necessary implication of assuming that there is no lock point. That was our starting point. If we suppose that there is a lock point, then that resolves the paradox. And here's why. So we go back to that same hypothetical person. He does not believe in the infinite reward. He believes that he is bounded to achieve only a finite amount of good throughout the entirety of his existence. Okay, so by claim 9, that means that he is necessarily going to achieve not infinite reward, the state of exclusion from the infinite reward. That's necessary, so just finite. If we bring in the lock point, then that means that indeed he is bounded in how much good he can attain. He did not believe in the infinite reward, and therefore he's going to reach that lock point, whereafter he cannot achieve any more good. And so the net accumulation of what he achieves is necessarily finite, and it's going to be completely compatible with claim number 9, where there's only a finite amount of good that he can achieve. There's not going to be an opportunity for him to accumulate more and more and more good, because eventually there's a lock point where, in his case, since he didn't believe in the infinite reward, he will no longer be able to choose to do what is good. After that lock point, it will not be possible. So, bringing in the existence of the lock point resolves that paradox, and for that reason I'm going to claim indeed that there exists a lock point.